It's 32 degrees today, and it's kind of warm, 90 degrees in our reckoning. And so I am here sweltering and trying to gather myself to talk to you. I keep in touch with Revision mainly through Chris and Eva and Sarah. But I do hope that this will pass and we'll be together again in the flesh soon. I assume that, I won't assume, but I guess that most of you will be very familiar with the idea of liminality. It's not an unusual thought at all, but even so, I'm going to do some basics and talk about it first for what it is in itself. So limen in Latin, the word limen, L-I-M-E-N, means threshold. It's like, yes, it's like being between two rooms at the threshold, or that's one way of understanding it, between. And that's one way that it has been discussed professionally. Another way that it has been understood is that the liminal is the time and space that is outside your normal living. So if we talk about liminality, which originally was developed, the idea was developed by anthropologists talking about tribal societies, that people would be initiated, perhaps young people might be initiated into adult life by being taken outside of the community, going out into nature, into the natural world, and very often being left there for periods of time. Maybe in the mountains, maybe for various reasons, things to do. And sometimes they would be buried in the ground or covered with leaves as a kind of ritual, imaginal burial. So that what they were doing was going through a death rebirth experience. I think that's something to keep in mind when we talk about liminality, that it's related to a number of other things that are very close to it, maybe even part of it. And one of those is death and rebirth, dying to a life that you're familiar with and being reborn into something else. I think it would help to keep that idea in mind. So the idea of liminality might also apply to time, not just space and place. So there are times that might be liminal. I think a good example for most of us would be our birthday. Do you know what it's like when you wake up on your birthday? I think for me, it has been diminished a little over time, but certainly when I was younger, and even now, you wake up and you realize this is a special day. This is a special day. It's your birthday. And all during that day, you may think of it, and you may feel even physically that this is a different day. It's something that takes you out of ordinary time. It's not the same as yesterday, and it's not the same as tomorrow. And that specialness is not just that it's something you want to celebrate, but it's that thinking of it takes you out of time, takes you into a place that you cannot find otherwise. You can try the next day to feel the same about your birthday, but you probably won't. That idea is also used in religions. And this idea of liminality is certainly used in religious studies. It's my field. So it could be used in religions, that there might be special days like Christmas or New Year's or a saint's day, or special days in a church calendar or a liturgical calendar for many religions could be considered liminal. I think Christmas is probably a good example that a lot of people, whether they celebrate Christmas as a religious festival or not, might feel. Things are different. People are singing these same songs over and over again. On Christmas, people give each other gifts. They give each other gifts so that Christmas becomes an example of a way we could live where we would not be paying for everything. It would be a gift economy. That's what Christmas offers us. So it's a very special day. You probably wouldn't give those gifts to somebody in the middle of July. But on December 25th, you might very well give gifts to a lot of people, to several people. And so what you do in that liminal period is often different from what you do in normal life. That's something also to keep in mind when we try to understand what's going on in this liminal period of the coronavirus. And also, I'm thinking all along of those of us who do psychotherapy, of how to do psychotherapy in this particular time. And maybe even think about psychotherapy itself as a liminal activity. When you get down to it, the liminality takes place every day. I mean, there are different things that go on. Probably you could see dreaming as a liminal period when you are in another place and then you wake up and you come back into normal life. There are many, many instances in life that have a liminal quality. I think some are more intense than others. And so to talk about the liminality of this period of COVID, I think is to say that we are in a very special, particular, maybe troublesome and challenging liminal period. And maybe thinking of it that way might help us deal with it. That's my hope, that's my thought. That's why I want to talk to you about it. So this idea, the word itself comes from an anthropologist named Van Gennep, who developed this pattern that others have picked up with their own language, a pattern that he saw with liminality where, going back to the example of young people being initiated into community, they might be taken away from their community. So there is a separating, there is a taking away from, and that is the first step. And once the person is taken away from community and from ordinary living, they are then in a liminal place. Joseph Campbell called that period adventure, the time of adventure. He got this idea from Van Gennep as well. Another anthropologist, though, who developed it more than anyone was Viktor Turner. Viktor Turner reminds me of my own life in some ways. His wife was very active, had some important things to say about liminality, Edith Turner, and his son, Frederick Turner. Fred is also, he's a poet and thinker and writer, and I've had occasion to work with him a few times, not a lot, but sometimes. And all of them were very caught up in this idea of liminality and worked it very creatively. So Viktor Turner is an important figure. If you want to study liminality more, I'd recommend a couple of his books. They're old now, but they're very, very useful, I think. One is called The Ritual Process, and the other is called From Ritual to Theater, and the subtitle is The Human Seriousness of Play, the human seriousness of play. So later on, in a few minutes, I want to talk to you about the relationship between liminality and play. But that's a little bit later. So to say play, and in the context talking to psychologists, and I know that you study Winnicott, I have to bring up Winnicott, his ideas of play, and also transitional objects. I'd like to leave it up to you because I know that you're, I'm sure, better educated in Winnicott's work than I am. But I've read many of his books, and I'm familiar with him. And I would think that there's a close relationship between the transitional object and this idea of liminality. Winnicott did say that he didn't want to reduce the idea of transitional object to toy animals and things like that. He wanted to make the point that transitional objects are could be almost anything, and they're not so literal. So I wonder if maybe it's not the whole idea of being in this COVID time has some of that quality that Winnicott talks about of a transitional object. And also then would bring up the idea of play and his idea of play. He did say that psychotherapy has to be play or it just doesn't work. You know, it has to be play. Once you get away from play and you force your client into some sort of compliance, that was one of his words, compliance, then we have lost play. Well, I would say we probably have lost liminality too, because part of one of the things we do in liminal times is play. Serious play, as Turner said. Okay, so that's just something for you to think about and talk about. Some of the things related to play might be things like ceremony, masks. I want to talk about masks later because they are a big part of the COVID times, people wearing masks. I think it's worth considering rather profoundly, if we can, deeply, what masks are about and why people don't want to wear masks. It's something I think it's a very deep issue. It's not just about not being told, they don't want to be told what to do. I think it goes deeper than that. So we'll get into that. So there might be also a relationship with theater. So play and theater and sports. All forms of play might help, how would I put this? Might be closely connected to liminality. And in fact, let's take sports. Sports might create a liminal time and a liminal place. And when I say that, I think about the boundaries of sports, games. Most games have boundaries, so that you know that you're in the space of the boundary of the play rather than in normal, ordinary life. If you mistake that, you are really in trouble. If you try doing some things in normal life you would do in the middle of a game, like start kicking a ball around in the wrong place, probably wouldn't work very well. So that boundary is important, which takes us to the related idea of Temenos. I don't think Temenos is the same as liminality, but they're obviously very closely related. So that's something we can talk about together as well, Temenos and liminality. Originally, Temenos referred to the area around a temple, not the temple itself, but the grounds of the temple. So you know when you are approaching a temple that you now have entered into the sacred space, even though you're not in the temple. That would be the Temenos. Where some people might think of the area of the temple as a Temenos too. It can be used different ways. But that's an interesting idea when we think about quarantine as creating a space, a Temenos, that we stay within as part of this liminality, and it intensifies the liminality to be in this Temenos. So what I'm trying to say is that when we isolate, or when we socially distance, or when we stay in our homes, or as I did for about a month, stay in my room because I was rather sick a few months ago. That was liminality, certainly. That was being in a liminal place, and it was also intensified into Temenos. So we can see that when we look at this experience of this illness, that we are being taken, whether we like it or not, into these very deep, profound areas that connect up with anthropology, but more, I think, especially with the religions. And here's a general idea I wasn't thinking of mentioning, but I feel that in this depth psychology that we do, this soul type of psychology, that very frequently we get to a point where if you want to understand it, you have to look at what religions have done. And you might say that the religions, although their intention may have been different, in effect, the religions have been doing archetypal psychology for a long time. I'll get to that a little bit later too. And the next thing I could add to it then is that I think there seems to be a relationship between liminality and soul. When we talk about the soul, we're talking about our experience of ourselves and of our world. And we're talking about a depth approach to that experience. We're looking poetically and imagistically, that's the whole idea of archetypal psychology. And so I think that this idea of liminality then can bring us directly into our soul approach to psychotherapy. That we're not looking at normal and external behavior alone. The psychologist interested or the therapist interested in the soul is trying to penetrate the boundaries of the normal and the literal and the concrete and the actual that we see around us, that world that is so well described by science, but puts a pretty thick boundary around our thought. So we, I think, try to have a different point of view and use a depth approach and a poetic approach in order to see the soul. And when we are in that realm of soul, it seems to me we are in a liminal place. We have crossed the threshold. And we could come back from that soul talk. I feel this as a therapist. I'm intensely involved in the soul work with a person in a therapy session. And when it's over, I do feel that it's like I do open my door, which is right behind me here. I open my door and I go out of it and I enter the normal world, the regular world, and I've crossed the threshold. A literal threshold in this case, a doorway. But I've also crossed this threshold that is the threshold into a new reality, a different reality, where play and magic play a big role. So I'll just mention something about that too. For many, many years, since 1970, 50 years, I have been studying magic, the magical tradition. So maybe you know the work of Angela Voss in London. Angela's done wonderful work that's been, in the focusing on some of the same people that I'm interested in, working on natural magic. And so I think that applies, the idea of magic, taking magic seriously. This is not being a magician, sleight of hand, although there is a relationship, but it's not really what I'm working with. But rather being in the world magically rather than rationally and pragmatically. But being in the world and having methods that are magical, methods that are effective, but are more imagistic, more like synchronicity than like some pragmatic action you want to perform and see a cause and effect relationship. So in magic, you don't really have cause and effect. You do something that is more poetic, more symbolic, and that has an effect in the world. So astrology is very, very important aspect of I shouldn't use the word aspect there, very important part of magic. And so I would think that astrologers could really help us in this time of COVID, both to have a better sense of the larger appearance of this illness at this time, this pandemic, and also then to help us navigate it piece by piece. That would be using magic. And magic, of course, like religion, is a form of play. So Another element in um, liminality that I think applies today is this idea of uncertainty. Um, Viktor Turner uh, frequently mentions this in his books on liminality, that uncertainty is part of the experience. See, this is one of the things I'd like to explore further. And, today I'm just talking to you more, not from conclusions, but exploring this idea. And I expect you to go ahead and do some of it as well. Um, so uncertainty, he lists as one of the experiences that we might have in a liminal situation. And I think uncertainty is very, very difficult aspect of COVID. To be able to live with uncertainty. Of course, that's a direct quote from John Keats. To live with uncertainty, negative capability. To be able to live in uncertainty is a skill for these times, these liminal times, to live on uncertainty, not to be thrown by it, not to have to rush into certainty. It's very difficult. I think this is one of the most difficult aspects of living now at this particular moment. It's very easy to want to escape from the liminal pressures of this time. See what I'm saying? Liminality has its own pressures and challenges. That's why it's useful to think about it. So if you are a psychotherapist and you see your clients having some difficulty with COVID, you might think about liminality and realize that some of what they're experiencing is the pressure of the liminality itself. And I think that what you might also then keep in mind is the very origins of this notion of liminality. That liminality starts out as a ritual of transformation, of going from childhood to adulthood, to becoming more mature, to being transformed, to entering community in an adult way. Think about COVID in all those ways, because this is what liminality is about. And when you are a therapist working with your client, having these thoughts in mind, understanding liminality in this larger sense, in very particular sense, might help you. You might notice then some of the things that your client complains about and what you feel. So I would say if your client is feeling uncertainty, the first thing you could do is examine yourself in the split second. Just go into yourself there and ask yourself, are you feeling uncertain? Are you sharing this experience with your client? Are you trying to avoid it? Are you yourself in your own life trying to avoid the uncertainty? Are you trying to sneak out of the liminal place? Are you avoiding the transformation that is offered in this experience? Are you trying to get out of the threshold and back into normal life? Now, here's where I want to mention a couple examples of how we might try to avoid or get away from the liminal, from the pressures of liminality. One of them is one that Carl Jung, C.J. Jung, describes several times in his writing. He talks about the regressive restoration of the persona. Maybe you know that. He describes that several of his writings. The regressive restoration of the persona. So if you're not familiar with that, let me just describe it for a minute. So regressive, it's a regressive move. It's a defense. The regressive restoration of the persona is a defense. It's a way of defending yourself against the pressures of the moment of what's going on. And what I'm saying is that I think that we as therapists have to be careful. At least we should notice where we are ourselves trying to get away from, escape from the pressures of the liminality of COVID. I think it's going on in the culture in a very big way. But we too might get into that, avoiding the liminality that is given to us that is being presented to us. It's like being in your personal life, and let's say you get an illness, or you have an accident and you break a leg. Life has given you something, and you've got to deal with it. You can't just keep saying, oh, I wish I could go back to what it was like before I broke my leg or had this illness. That wishing to go back to what was normal doesn't do you any good. What you have to do now is be with what life has given you. And that's what I'm saying about COVID. We as therapists, I think, first of all, have to ask ourselves, am I trying to avoid and escape the liminality of COVID, the liminal pressures of COVID? And then, can I, even if I am doing that, and it's very likely I am because most people would, I'm trying, maybe you probably catch yourself, I do it myself, saying I can't wait for things to be normal again. That is the regressive restoration of the persona. That's a defense. That's a defense against the liminality of COVID. So what we could do is maybe help our clients be with the liminality and be affected by it and have to reassess things. We know that there are a lot of very interesting things coming into the imagination out of COVID. This is a potential. This is a time where we potentially could really change culture for the better. We are getting ideas we've never had before. And the obvious one that we see, I made a list of these, so you can mention some of them. I hope I have it here. I guess I don't have it. Some of the things that we are doing, that we are thinking of, though, are things like there are cities in this world now. We know all these things that are no longer nearly as polluted as they were. The air is cleaner. Many cities are doing in India and in the United States. I know what London is like. So that is something. That's a huge transformation that could give us the impetus to change. Animals are coming to the foreground. Again, I don't know if you see this in London. I know you have animals in the city there. Where I live, if you could see out my window here, I live in the forest and I live on a lake. We are surrounded by animals and animals everywhere. And they're coming out there. They're no longer hiding as much. I was with our neighbors the other day, sitting at some distance from each other, having a little drink together in conversation. And a rather large porcupine walked right into our group, right into our midst. They don't usually do that. Walked right into us and sat down with us. It's not usual. There's something unusual happening in the animal world. There's so many things going on today that are changing that we can look at and say, oh, this is different. This gives me an idea. There's a potential transformation in there. I'm not saying we're going to do all these things as they appear. No, I know we're not. We'll go back to the way things were. But we, those of us who are alert to the liminality of our situation, might be able to capture those things that we're learning in this period of time and bring them back into culture. That would be that idea of Campbell and of Van Gennep of departing from the normal, being in a liminal place, and then returning to community and to the world, but not going backwards, but going forwards, going into this new world that has been created out of our liminal experience. Liminality is a time of transformation. This is what the anthropologists have been saying for what, 80 years. I think Viktor Turner was writing in 1940s and 50s. So this is something I think really worth thinking about for ourselves, that we can stay with liminality, stay with the liminal. That's our job, to be with our clients and allowing ourselves to be in that liminal place, knowing that the whole idea of it is transformation. One more thing I wanted to mention there, I'm not going to be able to tell you everything. I wrote a bunch of things up here, but I did want to mention that about masks. I think that the masks are very interesting. Of course, they relate to the Dionysian theater and to the use of masks in not only in Greek theater, but also in, not only in the Greeks, but also many, many other cultures use masks. And they may use them in relation to these liminal rituals where they take young people out of the village to be initiated. So the mask can be very important. And what do they do? There's a lot of controversy about masks, about what they are all about, but it seems to me it's pretty clear that the mask allows us to embody the spirits and the gods in our midst in a way to experience them ritually. Ritual is, I define ritual as any action that speaks to the soul. Any action that speaks to the soul to me is a ritual. So it's not just these dramatic rituals or religious rituals, but we have various rituals in our lives, our birthday parties, and our gatherings for drinks with friends. That is, those are rituals, and they speak to the soul. You don't need those. You don't need those drinks. You probably don't even need to go and speak to your neighbors or your friends, but they are rituals. The way we do them are ritual, very ritualized. That's important because ritualizing those experiences brings the soul into play, and that means we're in this realm of the liminal. We're in the realm of the liminal when we do that. And masks have a role in theater and in the Dionysian. Hillman has written some wonderful passages on the Dionysian experience. I recommend them to you very, very, very highly. I would say, please go read Hillman on the Dionysian. You can find them in two places in particular. One in his book, The Myth of Analysis, which is a wonderful book, not too easy to read, but an excellent book. And the last part of it, he explores the Dionysian, and he ends his book with the Dionysian. His understanding of it. One of the things he says that I think is quite interesting, he says that it's a mistake to think of the Dionysian mania, that's the Greek word that's used. What happens in Dionysus, we get a mania, like if you drink several glasses of wine, you might feel some of Dionysian mania, the madness. He says this is madness, it is not insanity. Such an interesting idea. He says so many people write about the Dionysian as though it were insanity. It is not, he says. It is a very, very cultured experience. It's a way of being in culture and community and in friendship and in love, the Dionysian. And so it's very much part of a cultured and, what other word could I use, of a very thoughtful human life, the Dionysian. But it is madness. But madness has a role in it all. Plato said this. Plato said that there are madnesses that are extremely useful to us. The madness of love, he said, is so important. It's a very important way to be mad. The madness of religion, he said, was very important. The madness of prophecy and being able to see things and that kind of madness. Astrology would be a kind of madness in that regard. There are different forms of madness, and they are positive, Plato said. And I think that's what Hillman is getting at. He's a good Platonist always anyway. And he says that about the Dionysian. So the masks that we are wearing, think about them. Think about this for a minute. Or I'm going to suggest this for the next time you're in a group and people are wearing masks. Aside from the literal scientific reason for the mask, to keep your breath and anything that comes out of your mouth to yourself. Think about the experience of masks. Isn't this why some people don't want to wear masks? I don't know if it's as strong as in England as it is for us. I do know, I have seen that there are people objecting to masks. Here we have a strong reaction against wearing masks. And what is it? Because people don't want to be healthy? I don't think so. I think there's something going on. It's not just because they don't want to look weird or they don't want to, weird's a good word though. Not because they feel weak, but maybe. See, the thing about the Dionysian is that it breaks down gender. That's one of the aspects of Dionysian reality in general. Hillman explores this very nicely in these two books. I said a myth of analysis, and the other one is healing fictions. That's another place you can find his very good insights into the Dionysian. There's so many bad things written about the Dionysian by Greek scholars as well. I don't think they get it, so many of them. So be cautious who you read about the Dionysian. But here we are. The COVID has taken us into this Dionysian reality of the mask. And it seems to me that it's, well, you look, next time you're with a group wearing masks or with somebody else, notice not the physical side, but notice your emotional reaction or where your fantasy is taken. Notice what's going on here, kind of a theatrical experience. What is that? What is happening? Why are some people uneasy about wearing a mask? What do you feel when you put a mask on? Even if it's for health reasons, it's still a Dionysian mask. You can't get away from that. We are still into the realm of mask. We're still into the liminal place where masks are used by people to help in the process of transformation. So I think that's something I haven't developed here for you today. It would take too long. But it's something I give you. I'm giving you projects. I'd love for you to do some research and writing and thought, maybe conversations about these things. Maybe you've already had discussions about masks. I don't know, but it's really worth exploring to see this in a deeper way, sort of an archetypal analysis of masks instead of just that physical, literal one. And you know, if you really want to see how the Dionysian play is being played out, again, it's very strong in America. I don't know if it's the same there. I'm sure there's some of it. We just happen to have public figures that really bring things up into a huge form. Anyway, another aspect of it besides this is think about the connecting COVID with the Euripides play Bacchae. I think that would be a very good play to read these days. Of course, it's a good play to read at all times, but Bacchae is just an incredible play. And so here's this man, Pentheus, whose name means sadness, you know, pain and sadness. Pentheus, and he's the ruler of his town, of his city, and Dionysus has come. That's what he does. He's a stranger. He's called the stranger. And Dionysus comes as a stranger, and he captivates so many of the people of Pentheus's city. And he takes them out of the city for ritual, dance, and orgy. Now, that liminality is absolutely clear. Dionysus takes people out, but to go there, you have to dress, you have to cross-dress. You have to blur, if not erase, the gender division. You've got to get rid of gender to get out there. And Pentheus thinks this is so horrible. I mean, he has profound disgust at what he sees going on there. And the play opens with these two old guys, Tiresias and Cadmus. They decide they're going to put on women's clothes and go out and join the ritual. So they do that. They put on women's clothes and they go out. And Pentheus is absolutely disgusted. And he wants to bring all his militant force to fight it. And of course, this is what we see today about COVID, I think. We see people who are strongly resistant to masks or to other methods of dealing with COVID, because I think what they're doing, they're in that position of Pentheus. I think the Bacchae would really help us understand what's going on today in our various societies in dealing with this global pandemic. So I think, Mary, it's 5 minutes. I think that's up. So I covered a lot of territory. I didn't think I'd have enough to talk to you about, but I think that's probably enough for a conversation. I'd love to have a conversation with you. I know we have to have it in writing, but I teach that way all the time, and I think it works very well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. That was very wide-ranging. It feels very rich, and I'm going to have to watch the recording to sort of digest all of it. But there are a couple of questions that have come up. So somebody's kind of posed the question, when, if ever, does liminality end? And aren't we really saying that liminality or uncertainty is the human condition?
Yes, I know. I think it's one of these situations where you know that it has always ended. Liminal situations usually are a period of time and a particular place. So we know that the end. We know that people have had pandemics before. I was just reading the other day of Queen Elizabeth I going out to Windsor Park to get away from London, to get away from the pandemic in her time, and setting up tremendous penalties for people who came from London to go out there who might penetrate her safety. And she is creating a liminal space just in doing that, going exactly according to what the anthropologists describe liminality as, going out there and creating her own space. So I think that we know that these things have happened in the past, that they have ended, and we can assume that this one will end. We don't know for sure, but it probably will end. But I don't think that to really be in the liminal place, you're allowed to think about that much. I think that is an escape. I think it's a little closer to Jung's idea of the regressive restoration. We want to restore the normal. We say, when will this end? Give me a sense that it's going to be over with and I can handle it. That means don't let me feel the pressure of the liminality. Save me from that pressure. And yet I think what we're being taught by the anthropologists is that pressure is part of our transformation.
Okay, thank you. So another question someone is asking for a bit more about is the concept of religion as a form of play. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Yes. This has been written about a great deal. I'd say about 20, 30 years ago, there were a number of books that were published about play, very seriously about play, a philosophy of play. And some of them referred to religion as play. And maybe you know David Miller, who's done a lot of writing in areas that you would be interested in. David Miller wrote a book called Gods and Games, which is about the relation between religion and play. He doesn't develop his own theory there much, but he surveys what people have thought and written about. It's an old book, but it's very alive. I would recommend that to you on the subject. Another book written by an old friend of mine, I haven't seen in a long time, Linda Sexton. It's a book called Ordinarily Sacred, and it's about how religion is play, a form of play. And she writes very beautifully and in a fun way playful way about how religion is play. And all you have to do is think about how people dress up in these costumes to go out and have their rituals in religion. They have a Temenos, they have their time and they have their place. Which is very similar to a sporting Temenos. You have your place you go into, your doors you go through. And the world is not the same inside a church or a temple as it is outside. Same as when you go onto a football pitch, you're in a different space. You've crossed the line, you are now in the Temenos. So religions have many, many instances of this. She in particular, Linda Sexton, talks about boxes. She has a whole chapter in the book on boxes, how religions use various forms of boxes as part of their ritual, and that whenever we use boxes, we are really engaging in a kind of quasi-religious act, like keeping things in boxes. Like when you, let's say, keep letters in a box and put them in your attic or basement or somewhere, you put them somewhere in your house to keep. that would be a religious act in a way, quasi-religious act. And it's based on what religions do formally anyway. They do this in formal ways. So that's how, it's a kind of play. You take your things and you store them, and you go and get them sometimes. Isn't it rather playful to go and look up some things you've put in a box for many years, open them up? That's a rather playful moment to open these things up. Or you might want to put a time capsule in your home. We've done that in our family many times. You put a little box in the ground outside your home so that maybe one day someone might just come along and find it with photographs and writings that you put in there. It's play. It's a form of play, but it's meaningful play. It's very meaningful, and it all is part of religious practice.
Thank you. I'm just aware of being very moved. I have a box with things from my children that are 30, 40 years old. And
that's very important, isn't it?
yeah, thank you. It's really touched me. There's a couple of kind of related questions, which is around ways of being with liminality, bearing the pressure of it, and is there an acceptance of liminality that's in conflict with the idea of will and its place in overcoming adversity? Is that, how do you see the balance between that?
Yes, well, fortunately, those of us who do this work, I think, follow a kind of polytheistic psychology, which means we can do more than one thing at a time. And one of the things we can do is let the liminality affect us and transform us and take us through an initiation. That's really what it is. It's an initiation, a process from being at one level of experience and one identity to another, and you assume the other one is more mature and bigger, and you are more part of community. That's what they all say. That's what all these rituals are about. The liminal rituals are about becoming more intensely connected to community. You can certainly have the will to help people get through this, the people who are sick and the medical workers doing so much. They may not like the idea of liminality quite so much. We are looking at it differently and trying to see at a different level what is happening. At another level altogether, we have to fight this, and we have to find ways to save ourselves and to save people from dying. Certainly we have to do that. But we can do all these things at once. I'm talking today to psychologists, I think, or people interested in these things who want a depth point of view. And so I'm offering what I think is an alternative, but it does not take away other ways of responding to COVID.
Okay, thank you. So there's a couple of questions, I think, relating not only to the fact that we're in a time of COVID, but also other massive social, economic, and environmental upheavals. And so there's a sense in which we're on multiple thresholds. And I wondered if you could say anything about the challenge of it's not a single limin, it's multiples, or are they different manifestations of the same one? What would your view on that be?
Oh, I think they are multiple. I think that's right. But the fact is, every day in our lives, we're faced with multiple liminalities. We're always faced. Every time you wake up, I think, you are leaving the liminal space of dream to enter life again. That's a challenge. And usually the dreams are a challenge. They may be more challenging at times than others. You may have a nightmare and you have to deal with that. You may have a very wonderful dream that feels very good. Then you have to make the transition into ordinary life. So there's always a challenge involved. But that's only one. So you get up, you wake up in the morning and you go into your day. And then I know for me, I may be scheduled to do an hour of psychotherapy. I enter certainly a liminal space for that. That's, I think, a very intense liminal space. So I go into that space for a while. I spend the good part of my day writing. So I have to enter that space, liminal space of the writer. I can't write if I don't enter the liminal space. I go into that place where the muse lives. I have to be there. I can't do it on my own. If I'm in a normal state, I can't write. what comes out is so pragmatic and so stiff, I could never get a book published. So I have to be in that place where the angels are, where the muses are, where they speak. And so there's another liminal space. So here I am, probably awake for 2 hours in my day, and I've been in 2 liminal places, very strong ones. And I have more to come.
So there's a number of linked questions. We probably have time for maybe 2 more. So there are various questions around magic and what magic means to you, the relationship between magic and therapy, and just to kind of, could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Magic is really, it's a bit complex, but it's a way of being in the world and being effective. It's a way of being effective where you don't do what you're doing through cause and effect or through ordinary tools and with rational means. Now, I learned a great deal of my magic from John Dee, who was a Londoner. And he, by the way, I don't know if you know, he was very helpful to Queen Elizabeth, going back to Queen Elizabeth I. And there's a story that she actually came to visit him at his house. I can't quite imagine that, Queen Elizabeth I going to visit this person's house instead of having him come to her, but that's what the story is. And he advised her. He advised people, these navigators, how to leave home and go out onto the oceans and come back safely. He advised them. How did he advise them? With this. This is an obsidian stone. I had it on my desk because I always have it on my desk. You can see a stone very much like this at the British Museum that has a little display of John Dee's artifacts. I understand recently there's been some question about them, but I think that they're accurate. This is an piece of obsidian that you look into. Now, John Dee said he looked into it to have help from the angels. And this is, now I may be leaving you, I don't know, but the angels, to me, angels are a very, very important part of reality. And for John Dee, they were not literal beings flying through the sky, but powers, like Hillman talks about the gods and goddesses as powers in the world and life that we imagine, that we give names to and give image to. John Dee said that this stone would help him conjure the angel, get the angels who would help him with the answers he needed to problems that people brought. I can understand that because I use this with my family all the time. They all often ask me to, not everybody can see, and I guess, into those stones very well. But I happen to be able to do it. I don't know why. My family are very intuitive, but they don't quite, that method doesn't work very well for them, but it does for me. So I can look into that stone and really get an awful lot of information and ideas and judgments. And I trust what I get from that more than just sitting down and thinking my own thoughts. So magic is a way of trying to use this is what Ficino said, Marsilio Ficino, who developed some magic in the Renaissance. He said it's using ordinary materials, ordinary objects for their power, for the power that we don't usually think about or know about. Like how many people would pick up a stone and think this is going to help me decide what job to take next? But it can if you use it in the way of magic. And we have a long tradition. There's a long European tradition of magic going back beyond Marsilio Ficino, who was the 15th century Italy, through, I'll mention a few, through the abbot Trithemius in Germany, Cornelius Agrippa, also a very fine magician, and John Dee, and Paracelsus, and Robert Flood, another Londoner. Robert Flood was a magician, and Amagus. So we have this long tradition in Europe, especially, of this magic that to me is very much in tune with the psychology that we are doing. But I know it's a kind of a practical application of that psychology. And it fits in very well with liminality because when I look in this stone, in order for it to be effective, I can't be in a normal frame of mind. I have to enter another space. I have to be in some sort of, I hate to use the word, but some sort of light trance in order for it to work. And that's a liminal space.
Thank you. So there's also been quite a lot of interest around this whole idea of masks and masking. And one suggestion that maybe that the resistance to the masks, the plastic masks, are the lack of playfulness, that they remind us of sickness and make us scared. So I'm just wondering if there's a kind of general desire to hear a little bit more from you about
Sure.
masks,
Well,
and particular ones.
The mask is they are frightening. And if you've ever been in or see any rituals where masks are used and dance and drum, they're not pleasant. I mean, usually they're quite challenging, frightening, scary, eerie. So I don't think it's unusual for masks to have that effect. I don't think they have to be playful. The Dionysian is not so playful. I mean, it has a very, very large dark side to it. It may have some playfulness to it, but it's very dark. So I don't think that takes away from the mask. And I think the point more is, I would say myself, I mean, I would say that if we could look at the mask, when you see it used, when you see people using the mask and you're with people wearing them, or when you yourself are putting a mask on, simply to think more about the effect on your emotions and fantasy and imagination than to just look at it practically. I think that's the big step to take. And for you, you may think this isn't playful enough, and I certainly don't want to say that's not correct. It very well could be. I don't know the answers to these things. But I would ask you, though, to consider that there's more going on with wearing masks than the practical, and to explore that in a lot of different ways. Just keep exploring it. There are so many books written about masks and Dionysia. A lot of studies have been done on masks. There's so much to do. So people have many, many ideas of what masks are about. But I would suggest that you help us all in this time of COVID by taking our conversations to a different level, not just the level of the physical and the medical as physical, and bring us into the realm of imagination, to images and narrative and story, and to the gods and goddesses and to the angels and to magic, to bring us to those areas, because this is where we can deal with them with soul, with a human soul. Otherwise, we are dealing with COVID as if it were some kind of purely physical thing. And to do that is inhumane. It's not human. We need a soul for our activity to be human. So I would say let's bring more humanity into our reaction to COVID by thinking more about the soul.
Thank you. That feels like a very good place to bring this bit to a conclusion. So Mary, do you want to come in from liminal space? There you are. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Nikki, for holding those questions. I think there's been one or two that didn't quite, but perhaps they need to wait in the liminality of a new answer coming. So Thomas, to thank you for coming and bringing, I don't know how you even imagined that you wouldn't have enough to say to us, because it feels that you've just spread a wide blanket, a tapestry of many things to make sense of COVID, and particularly the mention of soul stones that you look into,
Yes.
and angels and magic, and a seeing through into something else. You asked at one point, are we leaving you at this point? Hey, no, this is revision. We do this kind of stuff. And we welcome anything that takes us deeper into the soulful. So a huge thank you to you for coming along and being the patron. It's a funny word, you know, it's the looker after, the one
Yes.
who belongs and who cares for, and our thanks to you.
Thank you. I like belonging, and thank you for asking me. It means a great deal to me to be able to talk to you all.
Yeah. Well, when I wrote you, you know, it was one of these whimsical looking into a dark stone and thinking, I wonder where Thomas Moore is at this point of COVID, and let's bring him back. And I actually asked you for quite a bundle, seeing the going was good. I don't know whether you remember that, but and I will come back to you, and this doesn't tie you up.
Yes.
But Revision
That's
is putting on, or not putting on, but offering something called Soul Online. And this is going to be an event that will go out of house for transpersonal therapists, looking at soulful themes, some of which we've heard about and some of which we are exploring, including the Black Lives Matters. Where does that sit in the seat of soul?
yes.
And looking at these, how do we do this, bringing in a soulful perspective, and how do we do it through this machine that we're on? And at one point, Thomas, and I don't know if you remember this, you did agree to top and tail that event, but I will give you permission in the liminal to say that was a while ago, but there is an offer.
That's fine. Thank you.
That's good. So just to say that, and to remind us all that there's an opportunity here. We're going to stop the recording. Just stop that at this point. And